The New York Giants roster has a very different look and feel to it, but there's still more work to be done. I'm going to talk about all that and more with special guest Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On and for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And a special welcome in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. You are all appreciated and loved by yours truly. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, as promised, I have Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View, and we're going to run down the state of the New York Giants after the first wave of free agency and what's still ahead. You know, how has free agency set the Giants up for the draft and all that good stuff. Ed, good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you too, Patty. How you been?
I've been good. How about you? You've been staying out of trouble?
Trying to. Not always successful with that, but but trying to. My granddaughter hasn't put me in jail lately, so I'm good.
All right. Well, that's good news. That's good news. All right, Ed, we got a lot to talk about. So first wave of free agency is over. The Giants were very active, as I think a lot of us expected they would be, coming off the 6-11 record last year. Joe Schoen at the Combine telling reporters that the roster would probably look a lot differently than it did at that time. Looking at the moves that he's made, what stands out to you as being like the key moves and the moves that you like the best?
Well, obviously, Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney were let go in free agency. The Giants didn't really compete all that hard to keep either one of them in the end. And obviously the trade for Brian Burns. I think for me, Patty, what I've written and what I've said at Big Blue View and on my own show is, for me now, this isn't necessarily a rebuild for Joe Schoen. It's a reset. And what I look at for Joe Schoen is it's taken 3 off seasons for him to get there, for him to get where he wanted to get to, just in terms of this being the philosophy, the roster building philosophy, the salary cap philosophy that he really wants to get to. And I look at this right now as this is now Joe Schoen's build. We can't look at this anymore and say, well, he was handicapped by this Kenny Golladay decision that Dave Gettleman made, or he was handicapped by Gettleman drafting Daniel Jones, because guess what? Joe Schoen's the one that gave him the 4-year, $160 million deal. So for me, the big thing is this is now Joe Schoen's build. It's Joe Schoen's show. It's not finished, obviously, but we're now seeing, I think, the philosophy and the direction that Joe wants to go in. And that's the big takeaway for me, from the whole last week or so.
And of course, one of the big things he's done a little differently, unlike last year when they signed 50 million slot receivers, is they've signed a lot of offensive linemen to compete, to hopefully shore up, I should say, a unit that last year just wasn't very good.
Absolutely. For me, last off season didn't make any sense. All right. I understood signing Daniel Jones to the contract. I understood franchise tagging Saquon Barkley. I think coming off the playoff season, I don't think the Giants had much choice but to give Daniel Jones that contract. I think first playoff victory in 10 years. How do you blow that up? I'm not sure that Joe felt like he could. I think maybe initially that was his plan, blow it up, start over, let Tyrod Taylor start. But I don't think he could. So, but I think a lot of the subsequent moves, the million slot receivers, the way that they structured or didn't structure the depth on the offensive line, the trade for Darren Waller, which was a good move, but it was really a short-term sort of win now kind of move. I'm not sure that the off-season approach made sense. I looked at a lot of the decisions and I'm still scratching my head. For me, what we've seen so far this offseason makes a lot more sense. It aligns with Joe's belief in positional value. It aligns with Shane Bowen's, the new defensive coordinator, Shane Bowen's desire to rush with 4 guys. So for me, the way they've used their resources so far seems like it makes a lot more sense just in terms of the plan and the philosophy and the style of team they want to put together.
You mentioned Shane Bowen and, the differences, or one of the differences between Wink Martindale, and that is, rushing with 4 guys. When you look at the construction of, what they have done, again, where the Giants often got beat, especially against NFC East teams, was in the trenches, the defensive front, the front 7, over on the offensive line. Do you feel like the Giants are a little bit closer at this point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you look at the potential of Thibodeau and Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns. On the defensive side, you still have Azeez Ojulari. Who knows what the Giants will get from Ojulari, but there's still ability there if he can stay on the field as what would probably at this point amount to being a designated pass rusher when he's available. You still have Dexter Lawrence, who's a great player. I think they need more on the interior. You look at that particular situation. They traded Leonard Williams last year. They lost Ashawn Robinson in free agency. So they need more in terms of, hands in the ground, hands in the dirt guys next to Dexter Lawrence. But I certainly can't argue with the philosophy. They built the front 7 on defense with Burns, with Bobby Okereke the year before. They haven't all worked out, but Joe has spent a ton of resources now to try and fix this offensive line. Some of his draft picks haven't worked out, but it's been a heavy emphasis, and you have to like that. I like the veteran signings of Illuminor and John Runyon. I think they give the Giants experience. They give the Giants flexibility. They give the Giants quality, solid NFL players. And for me, one of the big things last year on the offensive line was because they didn't really think this through, at least in my opinion, in terms of the depth on the offensive line. When things started to fall apart, when they got injuries, they spent all year, Patty, shoving square pegs into round holes. They shoved all year trying to play right guards at left guard and backup guards at left tackle, and and rookies who had barely practiced, or guys that had barely practiced the year before, like Marcus McKethan, who's suddenly starting in week 2. They were shoving square pegs into round holes all year. Even Ben Bredesen playing center for the first real time in his career when John Michael Schmitz got hurt. So I think now you don't have that situation anymore. So it just makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, they definitely, and then you throw in the coaching change, Carmen Brasillo coming in for Bobby Johnson, and you look at what Carmen Brasillo was able to do with the Las Vegas Raiders offensive line with, cross-training guys and just finding the best spots for them and just, coaching them up. And that gives you, I think, reason to be optimistic that maybe, just maybe, this offensive line will be fixed moving forward. Now, Ed, obviously the Giants in some areas, they didn't address them yet, which, only leads us to believe that they're going to address them in the draft. One of which is wide receivers. I look at the current lineup of receivers the Giants have: Slayton, Robinson, Hyatt. Those three guys by themselves, not a bad group, but just what would a number one receiver do for that group, do you think?
Well, for me, the number one receiver, the Giants don't have that guy that requires a double team. They don't have that guy who defenses have to know where he's lined up all the time. They don't have that guy who opposing teams have to take their best cornerback and use him to trail guys. And so that impacts how the defense plays. It impacts what you do on offense. They don't have that guy who I keep coming back to, and I'll put this out there. Folks who read Big Blue View and listen to my show know I'm a big Roma Dunze guy. I'm a big Roma Dunze guy. I like Roma Dunze more than Malik Neighbors, and I think I like him more than Malik Neighbors specifically for the New York Giants, for the simple reason that I fully understand Brian Daboll wants guys who separate. That's his number one criteria. But the Giants don't have that Plaxico Burress that Eli Manning had. They don't have that Hakeem Nicks that Eli Manning had for a while when Nicks was at his best. That guy who's open when he's not open. That guy who will make plays in the red zone. That guy who will make plays to get you first downs, even when he's not open. You just throw him the ball anyway, and he's going to catch it. Um, for me, that's part of it. A guy like that just makes everybody better. He makes the quarterback better. He makes the other wide receivers better. He makes the tight end better because they get less attention. And because what have we said for years about the Giants, Patty? Whether it was Daniel Jones playing quarterback, whether it was back in the Eli Manning days, you keep looking at it and you go, will somebody please make a play for this quarterback? Will somebody please? Tom Coughlin used to talk about playing above the X's and O's. You can only design plays and you can only scheme so much. Sooner or later, your athletes have to be better than their athletes. Your athletes have to make plays and take things away from the athletes on the other side. When have the Giants had a guy who could do that? Haven't had one since Odell Beckham. And, you know, and for me, when you look at Slayton, you look at Hyatt, deep threats, vertical threats. For me, Roma Dunze is the perfect complement to what they already have.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the hot topic, quarterback, right after this. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your vehicle every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Hey, baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Lock On Sports Today. On March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get the local insight from the MLB local experts of Locked On Podcast Network. Again, find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. You got Patricia Traina, me, and Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, him. And we are talking we are talking Giants, State of the Giants. And don't forget to keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast later this week. We'll have Locked On Giants live, Train a Taina Dog. Do not miss it. Friday night, 7:30 p.m. Pull up a chair, grab yourself your favorite wine or beverage or whatever, and we're going to talk some football like we always do. So look forward to seeing you all on Friday night at 7:30 p.m. And Ed, we got to talk quarterback because no one topic, I think, on this team has divided this fan base as much as Daniel Jones and the future of what the Giants do with quarterback. Now, they added Drew Lock in free agency. We all knew that they were going to add a veteran. Joe Shane said as much. But now there's the debate of, should the Giants trade up? Should they trade down? Should they wait till the second round to take a quarterback? Should they just run it back with Daniel Jones? Where do you stand on this?
Well, Patty, I always do. Years ago, I created what I call the Big Blue View rules for draft success. And every year I sort of update those and publish those again. And those will come out again. They'll be out at Big Blue View this weekend. And one of the primary rules is if you don't have a franchise quarterback or don't think you have a franchise quarterback, then you go get one. If you think there's a guy out there, if you love a quarterback and you think there's a guy out there who's better than what you have or could be better than what you have, you go get him, period. Now, the big question is, do the Giants sitting at 6, do they think there's that guy out there? Do they think Drake May is that guy that's worth mortgaging a whole bunch of their draft and maybe their 2025 first round pick? Do they think that's worth it? Because short term, that hurts what they can put on the field in 2024. Absolutely. I've run that scenario a bunch of times, and you give up so much of your draft that it hurts what they put on the field in 2024. But is it the right long-term decision? If they sit at 6 and J.J. McCarthy happens to fall there, do they think J.J. McCarthy's worth the 6th overall pick? I happen to think he's worth a swing, but my opinion doesn't matter. It doesn't mean a thing. What matters is what Joe Shane and Brian Daboll think. If they think J.J. McCarthy, we'll use McCarthy because the Giants sit at 6. If they think J.J. McCarthy is a franchise quarterback who will be better than Daniel Jones and pass on J.J. McCarthy, then shame on them if he actually turns into that. All right. Then that's on them. I mean, what's the hit rate on quarterbacks in the first round, Patty? I've studied this for years now. It's somewhere between 30 and 40%. So if you throw Bo Nix into the conversation as a potential first round pick, that's 5 first round quarterbacks. Probably 2 of them are going to hit. So if you believe, so it's a gamble, it's a swing, but you take that swing if you think he's the guy. Daniel Jones hasn't turned into that guy, but I always defended Dave Gettleman for taking that swing because Dave Gettleman needed that guy and believed Daniel Jones was that guy. He hasn't turned out to be correct, but he took the swing. So it depends on how the Giants feel. If they feel like there's that guy that can be their quarterback for the next 10 years, then you take the swing. If not, you take the wide receiver, you take a quarterback later who gives you an option, and you go from there.
A lot of us are assuming that because the Giants put that escape hatch in Daniel Jones's contract, which they can activate after this year, that they weren't quite sure. But that being said, Shane has constantly said the expectation is that Daniel will be the starter once he is healthy. In 2022, Daniel showed that he could, that they could win with him. Last year, not so much. So the Giants being at a crossroad with him, I mean, what side is Daniel Jones closer to, do you think? Is he closer to being the guy we saw in 2022 or the guy we saw in the limited snaps in 2023? And also, how much is the injury factor playing into this whole equation?
Let me start with the last part of that question, Patty. I think the injury factor has to be part of that equation. And it's not so much the knee. All right. The knee, guys recover from torn ACLs. That's with modern medicine and modern training and all of that. The torn ACL isn't the issue. The two neck injuries are the issue. The two neck injuries, because you never know when there's going to be another one that takes him off the field for good. So, so I think that has to be a factor. Can he stay healthy? I think so much is riding on the 2024 season for Jones, for the future of the franchise. Look, I think the Giants signed Daniel Jones because after that 2022 season, thinking, well, he showed us this, but is there more? We think there might be more. Is the 2022 version of Daniel Jones good enough? I mean, that's the best he's ever been. But if that's the best he's ever going to be, is that good enough, for Shane and Daboll to continue to ride with him? In a league with guys like Burrow and Mahomes and Josh Allen and all of those guys at the top. Can Daniel Jones be good enough to get where the Giants would like to go? I still think it's an open question. My 2 cents is I think circumstances having been what they have been for Daniel Jones, I think Daniel Jones is more likely the quarterback that we saw in 2022. The question for the Giants is that good enough? And we don't know. I mean, we don't know if he's going to be healthy at the beginning of the year. I think we were all taken aback a little bit by the whole Drew Lock coming into New York as to compete for starting job thing, which turned out not necessarily to be true. But would you be surprised if Drew Lock starts 4, 5, 6 games for the Giants this year? I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't be surprised if Lock starts a couple games at the beginning of the season. I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Giants, if they're bad, if they look at the injury guarantee that Jones has going into 2025 and say, we're not going to the playoffs anyway. We're moving on from this guy. Let's get him off the field so we don't wind up having to pay this injury guarantee. And so sure, there's a possibility Drew Lock starts a bunch of games, but short answer is I think Daniel Jones is capable of playing the way he did in 2022. The question for the Giants is, even if he gets to that level, is that good enough?
You brought up the injury guarantee, and I was going to ask you, they seem intent on putting him back on the field, but there is that injury guarantee that if he gets hurt again, now they're going to be on the hook the following year for an additional $12 million in dead money. Do you look at this as a wise risk on the behalf of the Giants? I mean, obviously they don't want to give up on the guy, but you've got the injury history, you've got that injury guarantee. The following year, I haven't looked that far ahead, but I'm sure they're going to have needs they're going to want to do, guys they're going to want to extend. Is Joe Shane playing with fire here by saying, we're going to stick with Daniel Jones as long as he's healthy?
I don't look at it that way, Patty. I look at it like, with apologies to Drew Lock, with apologies to the Tommy DeVito fans out there. Look at the New York Giants roster right now. And if you want to be fair to Brian Daboll, if you want to be fair to the players in the locker room, if you want to be fair to the franchise, Daniel Jones is still the best quarterback they have. So if you want to be fair to everybody who's involved in the organization, you play the guy when he's ready to play. But if you look at it in the end and you think, this just isn't working, we're going to have to move in a different direction in 2025. Or if you draft a guy and you're going to do that, then at some point you get him off the field so that you don't risk that injury guarantee. But I think in the short term, I think he has to play because we talked about this last year with Tommy DeVito versus Tyrod Taylor and all of that, Patty. Players know when you're not playing the best guy, and that causes division in the locker room. That causes, guys to look at the coaching staff and the GM and in the front office sideways and wonder what the heck's going on. And you don't want that when you're still trying to build a culture and build a program and move forward. So you play the best guy as long as it makes sense.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about other needs this team still has besides quarterback and besides wide receiver. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Trainer, your host, joined by Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And don't forget to check out Ed's site, Big Blue View, as well as his podcast, on which I am going to be on as well. We always exchange visits with one another. And it's always a good time to catch up with Ed, who's one of my oldest and dearest friends. So, Ed, let's talk about the Giants' other needs. We've talked about receiver, which I think we can all agree is a need. We've talked about quarterback, which is likely going to be addressed. When you look ahead at, the second, third wave of free agency, the draft, what are some of the other positions that you feel the Giants absolutely, positively have got to beef up before the start of training camp?
Well, Patty, I think the obvious answer to that is the defensive secondary. Right now, Nick McLeod is probably penciled in as the starting outside cornerback opposite Deonte Banks. I'm not sure the Giants want that. I'm not sure that that's a great idea. And even if they do want that, you need more depth there. Trey Hawkins is the backup on the outside. And even after all of the hubbub about him last year in training camp, he didn't play well. So you need an experienced cornerback on that side. Aaron Robinson, who is still on the roster, but when's the last time we actually saw Aaron Robinson do anything? So you need more depth there. I still, they need, I wouldn't be surprised if they drafted another safety in the middle rounds somewhere. So for me, it's that defensive secondary. That's the, that's the biggest area of need. We don't know what Darren Waller's going to do yet. The Giants signed a pair of blocking tight ends, Chris Manhertz and Jake Stoll. But if they run across a tight end that they like in the middle of the draft, that wouldn't surprise me either, especially if they find out that Waller's going to retire. So a tight end, I think, is on the agenda. We've talked about quarterback and wide receiver. I don't know how the organization feels about Eric Gray. We know that, Saquon Barkley's gone. They brought in Devin Singletary to be the lead back. Singletary is not the volume guy that Saquon Barkley was. He's a good back, but he's never handled that kind of volume. We've heard a lot of chatter about the Giants, adding another low-cost running back, a minimum salary kind of guy, to take some of the carries. Would they draft a guy if they run across a running back in the middle to late rounds that they like? Maybe. To me, it depends on how they feel about Eric Gray. If they think Gray can be part of that rotation, and if they think Gray can be part of that rotation, maybe they just check off that need and do something else. But those for me are the areas that I think about. And of course, Patty, you got to draft offensive line somewhere along the way. You just have to. I mean, they signed, the Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon, and they added a couple of depth pieces. But if you find an interior lineman, in the middle of the draft that you really like, that you think might be able to compete for a guard spot, you do that. If you find, for me, if you find a developmental tackle that you think maybe could be a right tackle a couple years down the road, you take a swing at that too. So for me, those are the spots that I think about.
I want to ask you about one spot you didn't mention, and you actually wrote about this, I think, on your site, and that's at inside linebacker. You wrote about Isaiah Simmons and, why haven't the Giants re-signed him? And, I am of the opinion that I'm not so sure he's a fit for what Shane Bowen wants to run. But that being said, when you look at that position, you've got Bobby Okereke, you've got Micah McFadden, Darian Beavers is going to probably compete. Would you look to add to that inside linebacker group, especially if, they are going to move on from Simmons?
Probably, Patty. I just, I, I guess when you think about, premium positions and positional value and all that, I guess I just don't prioritize it much. The way that defenses are playing now, and with all of the sub packages, and Bobby Okereke stays on the field for every play. Micah McFadden, they get Micah McFadden off the field. Anytime they think there's a passing situation, they get McFadden off the field. So whether you're playing with three safeties, whether you're playing with an additional cornerback, but they get Micah off the field. Sure, I think if you run across a low cost veteran that you think can help you, sure, you do that in the remaining part of free agency, or you find a coverage linebacker in the middle of the draft, maybe you do that. But for me, it's just not a big priority.
And then finally, Ed, we haven't really talked about the coaching changes as much, but this is a big year for Brian Dable. He made over his staff. Obviously, there was that bumpy part about his demeanor and whatnot. Where do you think Dable needs to grow? Especially, he has a new staff, or most of some new people at key spots. He's had that fiery demeanor of his. Where can he be better, do you think, moving forward into this third season?
Oh, Patty, I think we don't know how much of what we heard about Dable, behind the scenes, making it difficult for coaches to do their jobs. We don't know how much of that is true, and how much of that is guys on their way out the door taking shots. All right. We just don't, because there's probably a little bit of both. There's probably some truth, in the middle there somewhere. Dable, he puts to the media, he's a nice guy. He's a good guy. He can be a fun guy, but he doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot. But by and large, he's a nice guy. The guy wants to win. He's got fire. And, there's a difference between yelling at a player, okay? Yelling at a player when they make a mistake, and embarrassing a player, okay? And he may not have done it intentionally, but I'm thinking about the tablet flip last year with Daniel Jones. Now, he didn't flip the tablet directly at Daniel Jones, but he embarrassed Daniel Jones when he did that, okay? And that doesn't help anything. That doesn't help anything or anybody. It doesn't help Dable. It doesn't help Daniel Jones. It doesn't help the offense to do stuff like that. So for me, it's just, I think every coach has yelled at assistant coaches and players at some point. But for me, I think Dable just needs to examine what's constructive and what's destructive in terms of some of his temperament. When everybody yells at officials too sometimes, but when you yell at officials to the point where you're sort of losing sight of what you're supposed to be doing, or you're yelling at assistant coaches to the point where it's making it difficult for them to get the next play in, or get the substitutions in, or whatever it might be, then that's counterproductive. So I would say that, and like I said, we don't know exactly what's true and what isn't, but I think that if I was Dable, that's what I would be looking at this offseason is is some of my histrionics and some of my volatility actually counterproductive, and how can I rein that in?
Well said. I mean, look, losing stinks. I mean, and I'm sure there was a degree of frustration that he felt, but to pop off and just, you got to know how to talk to people in good times and bads. And, Dable, like you said, good guy. I think he wants to win. I think he's meaning, well intent, his intentions are good, but you just can't fly off the handle, and like you said, embarrass people.
No, you
So,
can't. And that's, you know, Giants fans are familiar with Bill Parcells and Phil Simms yelling at each other plenty. But I don't think we ever saw Bill Parcells throw anything at Phil Simms. I don't think we ever saw Bill Parcells actually embarrass Phil Simms on the sideline.
yeah.
So, so I think that's the difference is, you know, coach. Yes, coach, and coach hard, and expect a lot from your assistants. But you have but part of that job also is to help your assistants, to make their job easier. Don't make their job harder. And I think, like I said, we don't know exactly what is and isn't true. I think Brian's the one who does, and Joe Shane is the one who does. And they, and they need to examine that, because this is a big year, and and this is Brian Dable's shot. He may never get another shot to be a head coach. So he's got to examine whether he's doing everything he can to succeed.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. Ed, always great to have you on the pod. Always good to talk ball with you. Giant fans, please check him out over on Big Blue View. He also has a podcast, Big Blue View Radio. Valentine's View is the name of the show. And I'm going to be on the show. So if you want to hear my perspectives to his questions, be sure to check that out. Giant fans, thank you so much for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast, making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Or if you didn't make us your first listen or watch, just by spending time with us, always appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe and like the channel. Click that bell for notifications on new videos. For Ed Valentine, I'm Patricia Trainer. Giant fans, we'll see you tomorrow with an all-new episode of the Locked On Giants podcast.